Jess FM and Jess TV. As you can see, a bit of a different background today. We are playing with our background to bring in the scenes of fall and autumn. Yes, we know that it is now back to school time for the kids. Have been back for a bit, and we are approaching the fall harvest. So I thought, what better way to celebrate than to change up the background a bit? And we'll have this until at least the end of Halloween anyway, just to make it fun. Or just before, we'll change to a spooky background for Halloween maybe. We'll see how that goes. But anyways, folks, I hope you have had a wonderful couple of weeks since we were on last. My apologies for last week. We did cancel at the last minute to postpone the show. And that was because I was working on a motion picture for, well, actually, it's an online streaming series. As many of you are aware, I'm also an actor here in Vancouver and have appeared either background or small bit roles in over 150 different programs. So yeah, I just got tied up on that location filming last week, so that's why we had to cancel at the last minute. If you have questions about the film industry in Western Canada, by all means, you can always ask questions. I'm happy to answer. Or anything else that you want to chat about, absolutely, you can do so. Don't forget that the live chat icon is open, so no matter what platform you are on, you can chat with us here on Primetime Live. As we work on there, folks, we're going to go coast to coast and around the world in this Primetime Live. And after we cover the headlines, we will, of course, be going into our main story, and that is why the minorities, whether it's Indigenous, Black, or otherwise, are so prominent when it comes to the cold case files and unsolved crimes in Canada. When you are a victim of a crime in Canada, are you less likely to get the resources needed to solve that crime if you are a minority? We will take a look at that in depth after we cover the headlines. We'll also, in between, show a small report on the Ostrich Farm. Yes, the Universal Ostrich Farm received a little bit of good news yesterday. At the 11th hour, of course, the Supreme Court of Canada decided that they will hear the argument for a leave to appeal. So it does not mean at this time that the Supreme Court will hear the case. It means that they are making a decision as to whether they will accept the case or not. However, the good news was that at the 11th hour, the phone call came in and the ostriches were saved from the mass cull for yet another day. So we will get into that as well. But let's start taking a look at the different headlines that are shaping the world we live in today. Now, a Crown Corporation is on the brink of collapse, triggering a nationwide strike that could paralyze the country. We'll also look at a small town in rural BC that became the unlikely epicenter of an international standoff over that flock of ostriches. And later, of course, our special investigation into why there are so many faces of Canada's unsolved murder victims being disproportionately Indigenous, Black, and other minority faces. And as we continue on, folks, it is yet another beautiful day here in Western Canada. We would like you to make it even a brighter day by interacting with us, or if you're watching a rebroadcast of this online streaming, by all means, add your comments to the comment section, like, follow, and subscribe to Jess FM. All of these little things that you can do on your end help to push us up in the algorithms and help to get the Google and the YouTube, Facebook, all the different platforms to push us up higher so that more people can find the program. And let's move on there, ladies and gentlemen. First, we have to, of course, acknowledge our episode sponsor once again. It's Carry Movers Limited from Western Canada. They do the local and long distance moves throughout Western throughout Western Canada, including BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and of course the Yukon Territory. They provide local services in Metro Vancouver and the Fraser Valley, and long distance anywhere in Western Canada. You can reach out to Carry Movers for a quote or for rates at www.carrymovers.com. That's www.karymovers.com. Once again, thank you to the fine folks at Carry Movers for sponsoring yet another episode. Now, we begin tonight with a crisis that will affect every Canadian household. The federal government has ordered a radical transformation of Canada Post to save it from what it calls effective insolvency, and in response, the Canadian Union of Postal Workers has walked off the job, launching a nationwide strike. Now, we know that this has been a very long fight and struggle that's been going back and forth between the union and Canada Post, as we see a lot of packages and other programs that are essentially taking away the business from Canada Post and bringing it into the private market. Now, the numbers are staggering, folks. Since 2018, Canada Post has accumulated more than $5 billion in losses. In 2024 alone, it lost over $1 billion and is on track to lose close to $1.5 billion this year. Today in Gatineau, Quebec, the minister responsible for the corporation, Joel Lightbound, declared the situation has reached a breaking point. Now, this situation is unsustainable. Canada Post is effectively insolvent, and repeated bailouts are not a long-term solution. Transformation is required to ensure the survival of Canada Post and to protect the services Canadians rely on. With that transformation, what does it mean? Well, this is what the breakdown looks like, folks. The government is accepting and instructing Canada Post to implement a series of controversial recommendations. The long-standing moratorium on converting the remaining 4 million Canadian addresses from door-to-door delivery to community mailboxes will be lifted. A move projected to save nearly $400 million annually. The 30-year freeze on closing rural post offices in place since 1994 will also end. And the corporation will begin to give more flexibility in its delivery standards, including potentially cutting the requirement to deliver 5 days a week. The government argues that these changes are a necessary response to a fundamental shift in how Canadians communicate. 20 years ago, Canada Post delivered 5.5 billion letters a year. Today, it delivers only 2 billion, so it shows the serious drop there. But the Canada Union of Postal Workers, or Canadian Union, CUPW, calls the announcement an outrage and direct attack on public service. The union says Minister Lightbound gave them no indication of these sweeping changes when they met just last week. Within hours, the minister's announcement, they made one of their own. They went on to say this slapdash approach without full public consultation is an insult to the public and to the postal workers. The government may act as a sole shareholder, but the public owns the post office. We cannot accept this attack on good jobs and public services, and we will fight back. That fight begins tonight, folks, with a nationwide strike set to begin at midnight, grinding mail and parcel delivery to a halt across the country. Something that we have seen in the past, but this looks to be one of epic proportions given the distance between the two sides and the threats of just imposing certain conditions. Now, the core of this conflict reveals a fundamental disagreement over the very purpose of Canada Post. The government sees a business facing an existential financial crisis driven by the digital revolution's decimation of its core product, which is letter mail. Its response is economic and logistical. Cut the fixed costs by centralizing delivery and closing physical locations. The union, however, frames it as its opposition in social and political terms, defending Canada Post not as a business, but as a social contract, a vital service that's providing universal access and stable unionized employment. The picket lines forming tonight are the physical manifestations of that ideological clash, a battle that could set a precedent for future of public institutions facing pressures of modernization. One of the other things that could be looked at is going the opposite way of cutting back, instead going full throttle in terms of expanding the postal delivery service to include a lot more of the automated deliveries that we see at FedEx, Purelator, UPS, and so forth. This day and age, of course, online marketing, online shopping, pretty much everything has transitioned to online. The problem is that Canada Post doesn't deliver Saturdays and Sundays as a regular in terms of the couriers. They also don't deliver at the same hours as the expanded hours you see with Amazon in-house deliveries and so forth. This has a big impact. As Canada Post has certain restrictions on the delivery and it tends to have things a little slower, that is a problem. The other problem is that many people pay for door-to-door delivery, and yet the postal workers do not even attempt a delivery. Instead, they just leave a little card in your mailbox saying you can pick up your parcel at this location. This is, of course, a bone of contention for the consumer. I know for a fact that personally, I've ordered and paid extra to have something shipped directly through their express service or overnight, only to receive a card and being told to go and pick it up the next day at the post office without any attempt by the driver to deliver at the door. They just deliver a card and it saves them lugging packages around, I guess. That is a major problem because if you are trying to court the big online retailers, then how are you supposed to do that when your delivery model is so broken and yet you've been the heart and soul of delivery in Canada for decades? It just doesn't make sense. So, of course, they've lost consumer confidence when it comes to that end. And in fact, that could be seen as a fraud, criminal fraud as far as that goes, that they are accepting funds to deliver to the door and yet making no real dedicated attempt to do so. Instead, just making you drive and delaying the delivery process by 1 to 2 days. So again, that is a fraud by the Canada Post Corporation and their drivers or delivery people. So that is another issue. Now, if you push up the rates on your traditional mail, because it is not used that often, of course, you can bring in extra revenue there. And again, why is the Canadian taxpayer subsidizing the mail service when there should be a more balanced approach when it comes to the revenue generated by the corporation? You have so many different delivery options available these days that, of course, when I say about the service and reliability, we find that it is much better and a much higher level at these private corporations. And why? Well, because they are profit-driven, whereas Canada Post seems to continue to think that the Canadian taxpayers can bail them out every time that they have shortfalls in their budget, which is almost every year. Now, if we look at the reality of it, if you go in and you restructure the entire corporation so that they are running more like a for-profit corporation, then that can make the difference. That can be a game changer. It will need some agreement and some concessions on behalf of the union and on behalf of the Canada Post Corporation. But I think in the long term, to bring someone in from the outside to overhaul it and to find a negotiated agreement between both sides in order to provide that expanded service, I think is more of a long-term viable option than it is to start cutting the delivery service from 5 to 4 or 5 to 3 days in rural, remote areas. Instead, we need to look at how we can expand the delivery to compete with the Amazon and the UPS and FedEx. Because let's face it, folks, the digital era is here and online shopping is not going away. And that could be the whole secret to unlocking the potential revenue that Canada Post is missing. They are completely missing the game on really what could be a gold mine for the Canada Post if they were to get their act together. So moving on though, folks, let's keep going. While one national institution is facing turmoil, the government is forging a new international link with other countries. They are expanding ties. Yes, in Ottawa today, a landmark free trade agreement was signed with Indonesia, Southeast Asia's largest economy. President Subianto's first official visit to Canada culminated in the signing of the Indonesia-Canada Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. Yes, that's quite a mouthful. To abbreviate it, they're calling it the ICA-CEPA. This deal, the first of Canadian and Southeast Asian nations, will give more than 90% of Indonesian products from textiles to footwear to automotive components preferential access to the Canadian market. In return, Indonesia will open its market to Canadian goods like wheat and frozen beef. Yes, let's throw in some maple syrup on top of that just for good measure to let them know that we love our maple syrup and we'd love to send it over to Indonesia as well. Now, the Prime Minister also welcomed the Taoiseach Search of Ireland, Seach, whatever. Michael Martin, he was in for meetings this morning before departing for London in the UK this afternoon. Now for a look at headlines from around the world, ladies and gentlemen. In New York, the United Nations General Assembly, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky made a stark plea for continued support. He warned global leaders that Russia will expand its aggression beyond Ukraine if it's not stopped. He said that continued weapons shipments from allies are crucial for this country's survival in its war against Russia. Tensions remain dangerously high in the Middle East. At least 30 Palestinians were killed in an Israeli military strike south and central in Gaza today. This follows a drone attack that was launched from Yemen yesterday that injured at least 22 people in the southern Israeli resort city of Eilat. Now, in response to the ongoing conflict, Spain and Italy are sending naval vessels to protect a Gaza-bound humanitarian flotilla that activists say has been targeted by drones. Meanwhile, in the southern China, yes, a massive humanitarian crisis is unfolding. Nearly 2 million people have been evacuated from Guangdong province as Typhoon Regasa makes landfall, bringing record-breaking winds and torrential rain. The storm has already caused devastation in Taiwan, where at least 14 people were killed after a barrier lake burst its banks. Now, another message from our sponsor. Yes, when you're making a big move, whether it's across town or across the country, you need a team you can trust. And that would be Carey Movers, a family-owned and operated Western Canadian moving company for several decades. They handle your belongings with care that they deserve, and you can visit them at careymovers.com. That's K-A-R-Y movers.com. Thank you again to the fine folks at Carey Movers for sponsoring another episode. Now, folks, let's move on to Alberta, where a string of unusual incidents in Lethbridge has kept emergency services on high alert over the past 24 hours. It started yesterday afternoon when a driver mistook the gas pedal for the brake. Something that happens. The result in this case, though, was an SUV almost full inside the Filipino grocery store at the 500 block of 13th Street North. The crash happened just after 2 p.m. on Wednesday. Miraculously, no one was injured, though both the building and the vehicle sustained extensive damage. The incident disrupted more than just traffic, though. It struck a cultural hub for the Filipino local community. Police later determined the 25-year-old driver held only a GDL learner's license and had no valid insurance. She was issued tickets for both violations and is scheduled to appear in court in December. Now, that is just a warning that, insurance is essential, as is having a license and people with you that can be instructing you if you are not comfortable behind the wheel. Stay out of the driver's seat if that's the case. Now, then, just hours later at around 10 p.m. to 10:15 p.m., fire crews were called back to the very same block of 13th Street North, this time for a fire that had broken out at the rear of another commercial building. Firefighters contained the blaze quickly, preventing it from spreading to nearby structures. The cause of that fire remains under investigation. Now, the chaotic events come as the city of Lethbridge coincidentally released a report today highlighting its state of emergency readiness. The report details how the city mobilized this past summer to support thousands of potential wildfire evacuees from Manitoba. This was a team effort. Each organization brought its expertise to the table. The collaboration was fast and focused on a desire to help our neighbors. Now, in the end, the city was not asked to receive the evacuees, but still, officials say the exercise was invaluable in strengthening partnerships and proving that Lethbridge can respond at a moment's notice, a capability put them to the test on the ground over the last 24 hours. Now, as we move on here, folks, the juxtaposition of these events provide a more compelling snapshot of the city's emergency management ecosystem. While firefighters and police were actively responding to two real chaos, the city's administration was publicizing its proactive ability to handle a hypothetical crisis. Also in Alberta news, the search for a young boy who went missing during a family camping trip enters its 5th day. On a lighter note, the province is now officially home to the world's tallest steer. Well, isn't that a bragging right? But in any event, folks, after this quick announcement, we'll come back and talk about the fight to save 400 ostriches in British Columbia and how it's pit farmers against the federal government, as well as it capturing international attention. Now, again, folks, thanks for tuning in. One more time, we're just going to remind you our sponsor. Yes, this week's sponsor is, again, Carry Movers Limited, your long-distance moving provider for long distance throughout Western Canada. In addition to local moving services in the Lower Mainland, Metro Vancouver, and Fraser Valley region of British Columbia. Carry Movers has been providing their amazing services for over 3 decades. You can call them up for all of your residential, commercial, industrial, and office move requirements. They also specialize in piano moves. Once again, you can find Carry Movers online at www.carrymovers.com. That's K-A-R-Y movers.com. Now, let's turn our head to the big standoff over the ostriches in British Columbia. In Edgewood, British Columbia, a dispute in the small community is escalating from a local incident into a national saga, drawing protesters, police, and even prominent allies of the Trump administration. It all started with an outbreak of highly pathogenic avian flu at the Universal Ostrich Farm. Let's take a quick peek at the animals that we're talking about. They are, excuse me, sorry about that, folks. They are beautiful birds, and they, some of them stand taller than I am. And I'm not that tall, but some of them are over 6 feet tall and just beautiful. I had the pleasure of visiting the farm over the weekend. Well, not the weekend, but over the last few days. I arrived back at the Lower Mainland here at the studio last night, just before 10:30. And what was happening there is overnight, previously, I was there and covering it just in case the Canadian Food Inspection Agency and the RCMP attempted to make any type of call action throughout the night. Now, of course, the warrant that they have only allows them to do so between 6 a.m. and 8 p.m. at the time. And that doesn't mean that they may not try to circumvent that and to do something overnight. So that's why I wanted to be there and cover it overnight as well as into the day as they were looking at the call to start. Let's take a look at these beautiful birds before we continue on there, folks. If you notice, their eyes are very human-like, and that's something that that I really noticed. I mean, I've seen ostriches many a times, but for some reason, they just, the eyes on these guys just remind me of human eyes with their little, their eyelashes, and yeah, just beautiful. If you make eye contact with them, you can't help but to love these little guys. Well, not so little anyways. But let's take a look here at these guys going around. They're so curious and friendly. I just think it's awesome. Now, of course, what you're seeing on the screen is just a small sample of the numbers that are there. They have, as I said, 400 left. So you can see that they are behind police tape, so you're not allowed to have contact with them, but we were able to get close enough, and then with the zoom lens it makes it even better. But yeah, just the eyes on them, I just find are beautiful. This guy's just so curious, he wants to be on camera so bad. And you have another one coming over because he's curious as to what we're doing here. And I'll tell you an interesting, oh, there we go, look at him popping his head up. But I'll tell you an interesting fact about this scene here after we finish the rest of the segment here, but I'll tell you something really interesting about that. And being that these birds are, as I said, under quarantine, they are being protected right now because of the fact that they were exposed to the H5N1. 69 ostriches died on the farm in December and January of this past year. Now, the big concern is whether or not they still carry the disease, even though these 400 that are left seem to have developed a herd immunity. Whether they have or not, that is debatable because nobody's allowed to test them. And when you're not allowed to test them, well, how do you know if there is a scientific benefit? Because if they have, in fact, cleared themselves of the H5N1 and any variant, then that means that there could be secrets that could be unleashed in their immune systems or in their genetic structure that could help resolve the H5N1 or at least work towards a vaccine or other prevention program. That is also important. Now, the farm owners and others, whether it was just coincidence of timing or as some like to call it divine intervention, the farm was under quarantine and under order of the cull. The Canadian Food and Drug Administration were on site and ready to start that call after 6 a.m. Of course, by the time things got going, it was much later than that. And a group of volunteers, over 100 volunteers were there overnight and during the day. Even more supporters came throughout the day to give their support to the farmers. And, well, that was in the morning. They gathered around about 30 people doing a major prayer group. And not 30 seconds, maybe 60 seconds after they said amen and finished the prayer, the phone rang and it was a stay of the cull order. The Supreme Court has agreed to decide whether or not they will be granted the leave to appeal. But in the meantime, that stay of proceedings for the cull order means that they will live another day. And that brought extreme emotion to the crowd and to the supporters. People were crying and laughing and cheering and, you know, just beside themselves. It went from a very somber and sad event to one of elation and celebration. Prior to the announcement, the farm owner, one of them, had spoken to the crowd. So let's hear what she had to say. And I just got to share that screen, and you'll see she's quite emotional. She, is talking about these beautiful birds and their history as well. So let's take a listen to what she was saying before the cull, the stay of the cull order happened.
There's Erica, there's Carrie, there's Sergeant Bilko, they all have names, and they are part of our family. We're not a commercial poultry operation. We are not for food consumption.
That's what I was going to ask you. For people who don't...
There's Q-Tip, there's Frank, there's Lulu, there's Barbie, there's Lorraine, there's Erica, there's Carrie, there's Sergeant Bilko, they all have names, and they are part of our family. We're not a commercial poultry operation. We are not for food consumption.
That's what I was going to ask you. For people who don't understand, people who think these are just birds, why is this? Talk about that. I mean, you said you raised these.
Yeah, they've been part of our family for 35 years. Us kids have grown up with them. We've watched them grow up. They've watched us grow up. And my mom's hands have touched them every day. They trust us. So to get removed and to have a bunch of strangers in there going to look at them like their life means nothing. And when they look to us for safety and we can't be there, it is the worst feeling in the world to watch your mom fall to her knees and cry and crumble and say, they're not your animals, they're mine. They are our animals. They're not the government's animals, they're our animals. We have deserved every opportunity to test these animals. Instead, we're paying millions of dollars for this big operation of helicopters, hundreds of police cars, LOA hotels. We're paying millions of dollars for drones and task force, and we're being treated like we are criminals. And this is, but yet we can't test one animal, not one animal on this farm that loses its life, that is living here 253 days healthy today. They're going to lose their life due to the Canadian inspection agency's flawed and failures in their system of their policy, broken policy. This is broken policy, and the unwillingness to work with Canadians is what's led us here.
Because you want to test them to show that they are not sick and to save them, essentially.
We want to test their health. Maybe we should test before we kill. Stamping out is not a one-size-fits-all solution, and it definitely doesn't fit here at Universal Ostrich Farms, and it hasn't fit for 9 months. All we've been asking is to test. We've had the collaboration offer of the United States with the FDA and the NIH to offer to pay for the testing themselves, because they see the rare opportunity here for humanity, what this could do on a global scale. And this is wrong. And then now internationally, the world is watching. The world knows what is happening here with our organization, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. This is just life versus death. This is right from wrong. This is what we teach our kids from day one, right from wrong. And this is wrong. And I'm grateful for everybody around the world that is stepping up to see that change has to start to happen. We said we're ground zero for change, and we're not going to stop until it's made.
Do you know if the Supreme Court is going to take on this case?
I have no idea, but you know what? We have international interest, large international interest with the Trump administration, and I sure hope that the Supreme Court would see some value and have some respect for that. If another country can see what we have the potential for here, and they want to offer it to the world as opportunity, for their children, their grandchildren, a better way than the reliance on vaccinations only, to have a more therapeutic, sustainable way to treat viruses and disease in the future. But we're going to eradicate it. We'll destroy it before we discover it. We're dealing with, speculation over science. I keep saying that. And we're losing our rights.
Because you want to test because you want to see if they have antibodies that could protect others.
They have antibodies. This has been proven within our expert witness reports that they had not, we weren't allowed to submit into court. These expert witness reports should have never had to just go through the court process. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency should have been looking at these expert witness reports as actual material to see why these animals survived. How are they living with supposedly the biggest virulent threat of avian influenza in Canada? Maybe they should be held heroes, and maybe we should use them as an opportunity to discover a remedy. Because how did they do it? If they did it, then we should explore that option. These animals, in my eyes, the minute they came out with that statement, became more valuable, because then that's how we should be looking at them and say, how are they living with the most virulent case of avian influenza? But again, we have RCMP that have breached all quarantine boundaries. They've been in their own clothes. They're traveling between here, Vernon. They're going into hotels, and they're at quarantine zones. We've had a hazmat suit worn by one of them in the quarantine zone, arresting us. And then he left the quarantine zone with it to where we were detained. And then we had to bring it up and go, you're still in your hazmat suit. And then he quickly got out of it. But then at the time, they're still handling materials. So with his gloves on, then they're allowing me and my mom that just came from the really infected area to then get out of the car, be everywhere, and use their personal cell phones to call our lawyer with our hands. So you tell me how we have the most virulent strain, but yet we have no outbreak response.
Is there anything I didn't ask you that you wanted to say?
Thank you. Thank you to everybody that is here, the supporters, the support that keeps pouring in for our family from all across the world. That just knows they see what we're fighting for. There's a better way. We need to protect our small farms across Canada due to broken policy. That Canadian Food Inspection Agency has a very important role in Canada, but it is broken. And we just need to help them repair it. And I think all of us as people, we all have a voice. We've been using our voice. And this is the court of public opinion right now. And we need to rise up and we need to hopefully stop this before they're all dead.
Can you talk about the cease and desist?
Yeah, we did. I don't understand a lot of the Aboriginal laws and how, I know we've obviously been asking for a miracle. We had somebody come and from, oh goodness, I'm sorry, what was the?
Jessfm and Selix? I don't know.
Yeah, Jessfm and Selix, but we are under, so offered us protection under their Indian tribe, writing us a notice of cease and desist that they're putting us under their tribe, and we are just supposed to give them the notices. They can meet with them if they want to, but they're nervous about meeting with this many RCMP as well, and just what's going on here. We're holding out again. That is just, we're looking for miracles every day. We wake up every morning and go, it's Miracle Monday. Today's Miracle Wednesday. So let's just keep praying for more miracles today.
Do you have any other questions? Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, folks, as you can see, it was quite an emotional morning there at the Universal Ostrich Farm. And what happened, as I said, in terms of timing, was a big group prayer that they took part in. And moments later, the phone rang, and it was the attorney saying that the Supreme Court of Canada has provided them a stay of the proceedings in terms of the call order while they decide if they're going to grant a leave to appeal. With that said, I'll show you another quick video, though, of the mood that was surrounding the farm shortly after that announcement, as people were just jubilant. They were excited and ecstatic that it actually came to a point that somebody seemed to be listening. Whether that was the courts or maybe a higher power above, we don't know, but it definitely seemed like divine intervention to those who were praying. So let's take a quick look at the emotional afterwards of the announcement.
Yeah, buddy!
So as you can see, the mood was quite excited there, as you can tell. And that was just moments after the announcement of the stay by the Supreme Court. We will definitely keep you up to date on this situation as it continues. And yeah, if you want to learn more about this matter, I will be doing a live chat tomorrow night on ProPix TV. So if you're on YouTube, just search ProPix, P-R-O-P-I-C-S TV tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Pacific time. We'll be doing a 1-hour segment call-in show that you can call in and voice your opinions on the avian influenza and this farm situation specifically. And we'll be going into a very nonpartisan, balanced report from both sides of the fence. So we will look at both sides of the issue and bring you an in-depth report on that. So again, that'll be tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Pacific time. Anyways, moving on, ladies and gentlemen, in the interest of time, we need to take a look at a few other concerns, and that is, of course, the disproportionate number of Black, Indigenous, and other people of minority groups that are showing up on the cold case files in Canada. This has been a huge issue, and we need to explore why minority victims are being left behind. Some refer to it as cold justice, and it's, you know, the unseen pattern, or as I think it should be more appropriately, willfully blind to the pattern as it goes. Now, every year in Canada, hundreds of murders go unsolved, leaving families trapped in a nightmare of grief and uncertainty. These are the cold case files, and they are piling up, but where we see benefit are finally in the new technologies and how DNA and genetics and other technology that's advanced so far is actually helping to solve some of these crimes. But what it doesn't solve is why there seems to be such a disproportionate number of minorities on the cold case list. And a part of that, you could look at the systemic racism that has been an issue in Canadian law enforcement for decades, and that they are slowly catching up and trying to resolve that. But it is not completely resolved yet in terms of the imbalance on how law enforcement treats our minorities and our Indigenous. The respect level still hasn't gotten to an equal landing with their Caucasian counterparts when it comes to investigation or treatment of individuals of those minority groups in law enforcement investigations. As we talk about this, you can look at a lot of the Vancouver Police Department through to Winnipeg, to Toronto. It's an issue across Canada, and you can actually find information on cold case files on most of the police websites. Now they are starting to post them, and this is again how technology is starting to play a role in trying to solve some of these historic cases that have gone unsolved. Now, as we look back here, you can see this on your screen is the Vancouver Police Department's website, and where they actually have many cases. And you'll see that, in addition to minorities, there are marginalized individual women who are working out in one of the oldest professions, as they call it. And of course, that means that they are not seen as a big priority in law enforcement when it comes to, say, a similar case of a prominent person going missing or being taken out by someone or suspected homicides anyway. So in any event, we see the disparity and the imbalance in that. When we look at historically, we know that, it's been a problem. But when you look closely at who the victims are, a disturbing and undeniable pattern emerges. And that is the faces in these files that their lives are cut short. And they are disproportionately Indigenous, Black, and from other racialized communities. We're investigating why. And this isn't about random chance. It's about systemic justice failure. The story begins with the numbers, which paint a stark picture of who is mostly at risk in this country. We're going to take a look here at homicide victimization rates in Canada, and that's per 100,000. Now, Indigenous persons represent a 9.17 number on that chart, so that's 9.17 homicides per 100,000 population. Indigenous women represented 4.31%, and Indigenous men, not percent, but 4.31 deaths in the overall picture per 100,000. Now, Indigenous men are at 14.13. Racialized people are at 2.51, and non-Indigenous persons are at 1.55. So right there, it shows the disproportionate numbers. Non-Indigenous women represent 0.80, and non-Indigenous men 2.30, so that's per 100,000 homicide, or per 100,000 in population. Now, as you can see, the disparity is staggering. An Indigenous person in Canada is 6 times more likely to be a homicide victim than a non-Indigenous person. The homicide rate for Indigenous women is more than 5 times higher than that of non-Indigenous women. In fact, the rate for Indigenous women is nearly double the rate of non-Indigenous. Now, to understand why this happens and why so many of these cases go cold, we have to look back at the roots of a national tragedy. And that, of course, is the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls crisis, and that is a national tragedy. For decades, Indigenous families, communities, and advocacy groups tried to raise the alarm about their missing and murdered mothers, sisters, and daughters. Their calls were finally answered in the 2019 final report of the National Inquiry into the missing and murdered Indigenous women's and girls inquiry. Now, its conclusion was unequivocal. The staggering rates of violence and the direct result of persistent and deliberate human and Indigenous rights violations. And they also went on to state that that amounts to a race-based genocide stemming from Canada's colonial history. Now, you cannot understand today's violence without understanding the legacy of residential schools, the 60s scoop, and the forced relocation from traditional lands, in addition to the deliberate destruction of culture and family structures. This isn't just history, it's an ongoing intergenerational trauma that also creates the very conditions of vulnerability that lead to violence. Now, that vulnerability created by state policy is then compounded by institutional failure. Throughout the inquiry, families testified about their experiences with the justice system, dismissive police officers, investigations that were slow to start or went nowhere, and a pervasive sense that the system was indifferent to their loss. Now we see the cycle of failure, ladies and gentlemen, in the tragic loss of 15-year-old Tina Fontaine. In the summer of 2014, after being reported missing in Winnipeg, she had multiple encounters with police and child and family services, but repeatedly fell through the cracks of this broken system. 9 days after her last contact with authorities, her body, wrapped in a bag, was pulled from the Red River. Her murder remains unsolved. A key reason these cases fail to gain the traction needed for resolution is a well-documented media bias. Research and families have long pointed to what's been called the missing white woman syndrome. The research is clear and quantifiable. When a white woman goes missing, she gets more stories, longer stories, and front-page stories with sympathetic photos and detailed biographies. Missing Indigenous women receive a fraction of the coverage and are often stereotyped, portrayed as being somehow culpable in their own disappearance. Linked to addiction or sex work without any of the crucial social or historical context that explains the system factors at play, and sometimes just out-and-out misinformation. One study found that news articles about missing white women were on average 4 times longer than those about missing Indigenous women. Less media attention means less public pressure, which can translate to less police accountability and fewer resources dedicated to a case. It is a vicious cycle of indifference that allows cases to go cold. The National Inquiry issued 231 calls for justice to break that cycle, demanding a systemic change across policing, government, and media. Well, of course, they also called on the overall Canadian society. Now, if we look at a parallel of injustice, anti-Black racism, and the justice system in that regard, yes, the systemic failures that plagued investigations into the death of Indigenous women are painfully paralleled in the experience of Black Canadians. While the historical roots are different, grounded in the brutal legacy of slavery and centuries of entrenched anti-Black racism, the outcome is tragically similar. A justice system that often fails Black victims as well. Decades of research from government commissions to independent academic studies have confirmed that the anti-Black racism is deeply embedded in Canadian policing and the justice system. Statistics show that Black Canadians are disproportionately stopped, questioned, searched, and charged by police. An analysis of data from the Ontario's Special Investigations Unit found that while Black people made up just 9% of Toronto's population, they accounted for over 60% of police use of force cases that resulted in civilian death. This isn't just about a few bad apples. It's about a culture of over-surveillance of Black communities and a simultaneous underprotection when Black people are the victims of crime. This creates a deep, rational mistrust of law enforcement. It's a paradox where the very presence of police can feel like a threat rather than a source of safety. Now, this profound mistrust has devastating consequences for solving crimes. When witnesses and even victims fear that calling the police could bring more harm than help, well, of course, they and their family members could become suspects or victims further because of the lack of protection for the victims. They are forced, therefore, into silence. If you see something, you know something, but you think twice. That's what it comes down to. Is calling them going to make it better? Or are they going to turn it around on you and your family? You see how they treat people on traffic stops. You think they're going to treat you right when it comes to a murder or something just as tragic? When you say nothing, it allows it to continue, but it also contributes to these cases going colder. Now, the person that committed the crime also gets away and potentially could do it again. This breakdown in community police relations creates an information vacuum, making it incredibly difficult for investigators to gather the witness testimony and evidence needed to solve cases, particularly in homicides. This is compounded by the fact that police-reported hate crimes targeting the Black population are also on the rise, adding another layer of fear and complexity to this relationship. Recognizing the systemic crisis, the federal government has launched what they call Canada's Black Justice Strategy. It is a 10-year framework developed in direct consultation with Black communities designed to address anti-Black racism and overrepresentation of Black people in the justice system, both as the accused and as victims where the cases go unsolved. When we look at this, we also have to look at the path to accountability, and that includes reform, resources, and recognition. As we look at the way forward, the missing murdered Indigenous women's group, and girls cause is a one to bring justice. It's not just justice and for them, but also the justice for the new Black Justice Strategy that is coming out to provide official roadmaps. But experts and advocates say the journey requires fundamental transformation in how we approach justice in Canada. When you look, as I said, here at the screen, I'm going to show you some of the cold case files from across Canada in terms of how they are starting to use technology to try and bring closure to some of these cases. Cases that have been underrepresented over the years, and some of them may actually be, from almost 100 years ago in some cases. Now, these ones here for the Vancouver Police Department, for example, is the Paul family. Now, this may seem like your traditional white family here in Vancouver, but of course, they were immigrants from Russia. This case is one of uniqueness in the fact that it could have actually been Russian agents or others involved in this unsolved case. Now, Vancouver has a really nice layout in terms of their cold case files if you are interested in looking at them. It shows a case overview. They could have more information on some of the cases, but this one here actually goes quite in depth for this particular one. They also show historic media reports. So again, if maybe you are looking at the different cases and different cold cases, if that's of interest to you, which is a genre of its own, of course you can get a lot more detail. Now, as we go from that one, we can also take a transition over and look at the the Toronto Police Service, and you'll see a difference there. Now, in British Columbia, the sex worker trade or trade workers are very prominent on the list in Vancouver, as are Indigenous. When you go to Toronto, though, then you are looking at another demographic that we talked about in Unsolved Homicides, and that is of the Black community and those of racial discrimination when it comes to a systemic failure. Now, in Toronto, they do have the case there, and you can see as we scroll through here, I'm just going to make sure that, that's coming up. Okay, perfect. As you can see, the disparity is very clear when you look at the screen. It really gives a clear picture of the majority of those cases that are unsolved. And in this instance, these are all homicide cases that have been unsolved in the Toronto Police Service. So you can see that they go back substantially in time, and some of them more recent, but these are all brought onto this list because they are considered cold cases. Now, cold cases are essentially cases where they have no leads. They have, exhausted every tip that's come in, but sometimes all it takes is just one little thread to weave together certain clues and bring a new approach to the case or a new angle that the officers and investigators can look at that cracks the case wide open. that in many cases is sitting in the minds of individuals who think they know something about it, but they don't want to be embarrassed by bringing up information that turns out not to be related to the case. Now, that is where I encourage anybody who thinks that they have information about a cold case file that they think doesn't really matter. Well, I suggest that maybe it does. It could be just that little link between two other tips that bring it together to create a picture for investigators to move on. Again, all of these families of victims of crime, they deserve the closure and to know what happened to their family members. And if not, at least to potentially hold those responsible to account for what has happened. It is a shame when those that are involved in such crimes, and horrific at some points, just horrific levels of crime at some points. And it's really bad when the families don't even get the closure to know that there was somebody held accountable for their family member's murder. Several years ago, just a couple of years ago, actually, I have an uncle who was in Ontario. He was residing there, and due to unfortunate circumstances, we don't know the details yet because the individual pled guilty. We didn't get all of the details of the case, but we did get a fair number of details. And the sad, disturbing part is that he was murdered in a potential dispute. We don't know exactly what happened there that led up to it. But the individual, a young man, actually went crazy on him and beat him so bad and literally chewed a part of his face off. As I said, that I had to repeat that because it's unbelievable. And it was so bad that the investigators and the coroner had to identify him by his tattoos. Now, again, the individual in that case was caught and held responsible. He ended up pleading guilty and to a lesser charge and was given a very minimal sentence in the courts, a couple of years of imprisonment. Now, this, I will add, was supported by the majority of my family. And the reason why is because we didn't want to see another life lost besides my uncle's. We believed that people deserve second chances. We believed in rehabilitation. We believed that there was some type of psychotic or mental health issue that had gone unaddressed. It was our hope that in having mercy on this individual, that he could turn his life around and use it as a point of good in his community and give back, but also that he could learn how to be a better person and what triggered that horrific event. Nobody in their right mind, ladies and gentlemen, chews the face off of another person without there being a major problem in their tenacity. So again, we chose to have compassion, although the crime that he committed was horrific. Sometimes you have to look beyond that to try to find redemption, not only for the accused, but also for peace within our own minds, that is what our uncle would have wanted. He believed in second chances, and he believed in trying to help people to be better. And, that's something that we really took into consideration at that time as well. So as hard as it is, sometimes, it is about compassion. It is about forgiveness to a point, but it's also about trying to ensure that our justice system works properly and that the prison systems have the resources to offer mental health assistance. A lot of times in the criminal justice system, in the jails, in the institutions, they are not providing adequate mental health resources, and that is a major problem. But let it also be a catalyst for change in the future. As we look, of course, we know we are actually out of time tonight, but I'm going to go a little later. As long as Jesse gives me the thumbs up, we'll go a little longer tonight because it is an important topic that we are discussing and one of big importance to the entire nation. Now, when we take a look right now, I've brought up the Manitoba Crime Stoppers website, and you can see again a disproportionate representation of unsolved files. And again, we are looking to find solutions. And if you have ideas, by all means, share them on the comment section. It's important that all Canadians have a say. Send letters or emails to your MLAs, your MPs, even the mayor at the local level, because they have conferences that they can bring it up and have the power to make a change. So again, if we all speak up and stop remaining silent, then of course we can see change being instituted within our criminal justice system and how these cold case files continue. Now, John Antfield, a criminologist and former police officer who specializes in the study of unsolved homicides, he is a professor that is looking at the systemic roots of the problem. From an investigative standpoint, we ask what are the practical barriers from that cause these specific cases to go cold. Now, he responded that the practical barriers are often a direct result of the systemic ones. Cold cases are incredibly resource intensive. They require dedicated investigators, significant funding for new forensic techniques like genetic genealogy, and massive amounts of data analysis. When a cold case is deprioritized from the very beginning due to conscious or unconscious bias about the victim's race, lifestyle, or socioeconomic status, the crucial early steps are missed. When evidence isn't preserved properly, witness interviews aren't conducted as thoroughly as they should be, and the trail goes cold, and that happens much faster as a result. Now, we know that he has worked on building comprehensive database of unsolved murders in the United States. So what is something that could help here in Canada, we asked. And he stated that absolutely, it's a critical missing piece. Right now, data integrity is a major problem holding back any serious inquiry into the issue in Canada. We don't even have a reliable public national database of these cases that can be easily analyzed. A consolidated one-source database would change everything. It would allow us, the public, to identify patterns to see which police forces have lower solve rates for specific types of crimes, and to create a new level of public accountability that simply doesn't exist today. Very interesting facts that he brings up here. And we asked, beyond data and technology, what about the human elements? We've heard of the crucial work of advocacy groups for families, but what about those that don't have advocates? And, this is a question, of course, people have. And the response there was that that is absolutely essential. They provide support to families navigating an impossible trauma. They keep public pressure on the police and politicians when a case stalls. And they also often do the work of tracking cases that the system itself has failed to prioritize. But that shouldn't have to carry the burden alone. And I mean in terms of the advocates and the families. They shouldn't be the ones that carry this burden all on themselves and on their own shoulders. We need properly funded, culturally competent victim services embedded in the system. We need police forces that receive mandatory ongoing training in anti-racism and trauma-informed practices. The federal government's Black Justice Strategy, for example, includes funding for Black-specific court workers and victim support. That's a positive step because it acknowledges that a one-size-fits-all approach to justice has failed these communities. Now, of course, that was again Professor Antfield. Thank you very much for taking the time for answering those couple of questions for us. Now, the path to justice is not simple, ladies and gentlemen. It requires more than resources, more than just a few forensic technology pieces or better databases. It requires a national reckoning with our history and a sustained commitment to dismantling the systems that devalue the lives of Indigenous, Black, and other racialized communities. We can add to that other underrepresented communities, such as the LGBTQ plus community, and how they are disproportionately looked upon as well when it comes to the bias, whether it's conscious or subconscious. Now, the solutions proposed in reports like the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Inquiry and the Black Justice Strategy represent a critical philosophical shift. They recognize that preventing crime and solving crime are inextricably linked to addressing a broader social determinants of justice. Inequities in housing. education, healthcare, and economic opportunity. Of course, these all play a role. Now, this is a move away from a purely reactive justice system to one that understands its roles in proactive societal repair. It demands that we see every victim as worthy of justice, every family is worthy of getting answers, and every cold case file not as a statistic, but as a promise that is yet to have been kept. That's our program for tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for watching, and once again, thank you to Carey Movers for sponsoring this episode. If you are moving locally in the Metro Vancouver, Fraser Valley area of British Columbia, they provide local moving services, excellent rates, and value. You can contact Carey Movers at www.careymovers.com. They also provide a first-class service throughout Western Canada for long-distance moves. They provide a quote in writing before you even book the move in order to ensure that you have the calmness and security of mind when it comes to knowing there's not going to be any hidden prices or any additions upon delivery of your goods. They are loaded into one truck, what they call fleet specific. So that means that your goods are loaded into one truck. They remain on that truck until the point of delivery. So there's no transferring of your goods from one truck to another, getting lost in warehouses or in transportation. Everything is secured. And that truck is specific to your personal items so that there is no cross-contamination. If someone had, bed bugs or mice or rodents or whatever, that will not be spread to your goods in the same truck, because your truck is designated just for you, and all trucks are cleaned out in between jobs to ensure that there is very clean conditions for your move. You can contact Carey Movers again at www.careymovers.com. That's K-A-R-Y movers.com. Next week, folks, we are going to delve into the municipal and civic election coming up in Lethbridge. Yes, there are more candidates in the race. We're going to look at all of the different points, as well as the voting that will take place from October the 8th to the 20th. Don't forget, the civic election is a priority, or at least it should be, for all residents of Lethbridge. If you fail to get out and have your voice heard, then you might as well remain silent until the next chance, because if you don't get out and vote, what opportunity or what point is there in complaining about the system when you're not participating in it? So again, remember, the civic election is coming up. We'll have a lot of information, including who is running in the different positions, and we'll look at that next week. Now, thank you very much for watching Primetime Live here on Jess TV and Jess FM. We will see you again next week, 8 o'clock Mountain Standard Time. Thank you, Lethbridge. Thank you, Canada. And thank you to the world for all of those watching this week. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe. And, of course, leave your comments in the comment section, because that is important to keep everybody as a part of the show. Thank you again to Jesse Parmar sitting in the studio. Yes, we are remotely linked. And I thank Jesse for his hard work in making the show happen. We'll see everyone next week. Take care and stay safe.